All right, looks like we should be live. Yes, it says we're live. Hey, everybody. Oh, I'm just now realizing my background is still the video game background. That's my day job. Time for my night job. Here we go. There's Zacchaeus. Everybody, welcome to the Love First Christians Bible study for this week, last week of February. We got a lot to go over today. A lot of Leviticus stuff, as well as some very unpleasant. Everything in Leviticus is unpleasant. No, that's not even true. There's actually some stuff that's positive in Leviticus, but let's be honest, it doesn't really hold up when we talk about kind of today's moral and ethics. For that period, it was very progressive. Currently, even your most conservative would have a tough time backing it up. We got a lot of course news to go over as well when we talk about that, and of course a lot of stuff going on in people's personal lives. We do take questions and comments live, so anybody who wants to comment, please feel free to do so. I should have some folks joining us here in a second now. If you want to join the Love First Christians, I left the link in the description of this video. It is a free Discord group, and we just have a lot of in-depth discussions. This week we had a cool one about metal. And that was cool to get into. Last week we were talking about if the Virgin Mary was devoid of original sin. Yeah, and of course, personal life stuff. Not too much I can divulge. I don't know how private they want to keep it, but yeah, people going through a lot of difficulties in life. And if that sounds like something that you would like some love first wisdom on, it's a great group for that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and I'll go ahead and get started with some of the readings we had this week. I'm not gonna start on too many of the controversial ones yet until we get more in until we get some more folks here who can kind of push back. I hate to deliver my own point of view only on difficult situations because difficult complex verses, otherwise it makes them too simple. And part of the reason we talk about these things is because they're not all that simple, and there's a lot of different things here. I'll go ahead and get started with something that I saw earlier this week. Let's see here. It was actually two atheists. I was watching The Political Orphanage, and it was Andrew Heaton talking to Jonathan Rauch. And they talk about how Christianity dropped the ball. Now, I will say this. I find it insufferable when people who aren't my faith tell me what my faith believes. Or say, like, oh, your faith, fails at this or whatever. It's a frustrating thing. It's the same reason I don't try to tell atheists why they're stupid for believing what they believe. Because whenever I have an atheist explain what I believe, it is the dumbest, worst, bad faith interpretation that I can imagine. And I'm not saying that every atheist is like this. I guess I don't want to generalize too much, but by and large, whenever atheists are like, oh, well, Christians believe this stupid thing, I'm just like, no, I don't. Do you believe that stupid thing? Because I don't believe that stupid thing. And it's like I said, it's just frustrating to listen to and just kind of buckle up, and I'm just supposed to deal with it. We're just supposed to accept it for what it is. But I will say both of these folks have very positive things to say about Christianity. One of them even gets choked up because of how positive his church was in his life. And they're talking about how Christianity, especially culturally, and I know the title's called Drop the Ball on Democracy, and I'm not a Democrat. I'm an anarchist. I don't care for, democracy above anything else. But a lot of cultural ways that Christianity really dropped the ball when it should have been helping people, and instead kind of fell into a lot of idolatry and a lot of issues. And it's clear that both of these people have a positive view of what Christians could be contributing. What's up, Bray? Good to see you too, man. Happy to have you here. So I'm going to go ahead and if you're looking at a place that serves comments, I will go ahead and serve a link to that video because I think it's a good analysis. I think we do well. One of our first meetups that we had, I invited a lot of non-Christians on there because I think we do well to listen to them. And I'm not saying that, obviously we don't accept everything they say. Like an atheist who tells me, "Oh no, you believe in killing gay people," and look, I saw this verse here, so yeah, you hate the gays. It's like, all right, well, I, I mean, I will explain. Of course, I understand what the verse looks like, but if they continue to just be like, "Nope, this is what you think," well, all right, then, see you later. But, I think we do well to listen to criticisms that the non-faithful have, because these are the people we have to reach, right? These are the people we have to witness to. People don't listen until they feel heard. And so until we really hear them and understand a lot of their concerns, we can't really reach them. And I think in this particular case with the episode I'm talking about is we bring Aaron onto the stage. What's up, Aaron?
Hey, sorry I'm late.
You're okay. I like the
I'm just about to jump on. I get a work call. So.
That's how it be sometimes. It's fine. I was just shooting the breeze about the link I had with the two atheists talking about Christianity in America. And I don't know if you saw it, but it doesn't matter because I've discussed it anyway. It's Andrew Heaton, and if you have it, he's a very funny guy. So I've left that link there. You join Bray. Bray says, "Hey,
hey Ray."
Yeah. So now that you are here, let's go ahead and get into the Bible. I can stop stalling for time with our little weekly discussions and get into the Bible. And boy, Leviticus was a rough one this week.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I basically, like, I start to write things down of like discussion points that I want to talk about, and half the time they're in Leviticus, and half the time it's oh no, this is just Levitical law again. I shouldn't even bother bringing this up because it's just same old, same old.
Right.
But there are a couple of things that I brought up, even though, in spite of that.
Yeah.
Well, actually, just one thing about Leviticus.
I mean, we got time. Go ahead and toss it out there. Let's.
The very beginning of this week's reading, it talks about Aaron's sons.
Yeah.
And they committed the sin of burning the wrong kind of incense or setting the wrong kind of fire. Yeah, it wasn't super clear what exactly the problem was, but God not only put them to death instantly, but also told their wives that they weren't even allowed to mourn them. And that seemed so wildly out of pocket compared to how Israelites had been thus far, treating God and not being sufficiently reverent. And the only thing I could think of that justified it was that because Aaron's family was the Levites and therefore they were the religious leaders, the fact that they were doing things wrong according to the law was much more severe. But even that seems so wildly disproportionate that I wanted to bring it up and talk to you about it.
Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and say that this is I have a theological attempt to explain this. I am going to go ahead and say this is one of the verses that, much like when we haven't got to it yet, but when it says to like execute all the captives and their children or whatever, and then they ask God about that, and it's like, what are you talking about? Don't do that. That's terrible. I believe that this is a misinterpretation of whatever they think God's law to be. Obviously, mourning even sinners, even people who make mistakes, is something that we should be allowed to do. I will let you give your thoughts. I guess any thoughts that you have about it before I give kind of my attempt to theologically explain it. Again, I'm going to do my best. I believe it's just them not understanding what God is doing. But any thoughts that you have?
Well, that would be comforting because I'm thinking like the fact that I can kind of understand why, if Aaron's sons are Levites and therefore they should be the religious leaders, and therefore if they're making this mistake, it's not only just them, they're leading the people astray too. So I can kind of understand the justification for their deaths. I think it's overly cruel, but I understand that, why it's happening according to that. But the fact that Moses is telling his family members, like his in-laws, you can't even mourn Aaron's sons because, I didn't really understand the justification that was given there, but like telling a spouse that they can't mourn their dead spouse is just wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and Bray brings up a good point here that it's not necessarily just this time. God did drop Ananias and his wife for lying to the apostles, so I don't have an answer here. Wrath can go beyond our understanding. This is definitely one of them. All right, so putting on my best theologian hat, I would say that what's happening here is there are different, as we see throughout even Levitical law, that the punishment for theft kind of changes from death to cutting off your hands to restitution to sacrifice, that they're not quite sure. And that's because we all have different like levels of compassion for people who die. The trouble is what the Israelites are doing is they're setting down blanket laws for something. They think like, oh yeah, anytime this happens, they get put to death. And then they find somebody who committed that sin, but they're sympathetic, and then they end up changing the law. Right. So my guess is that well, I shouldn't say my guess. My understanding from a theological perspective is that Aaron's sons were crummy people. And they did not commit this sin out of ignorance. We're not really given their motivation, but that they did it because they were disrespecting God, the law, all that. As you mentioned already, and I think wisely, we saw the Levites already in last week's reading get held to a higher standard than everybody else. So once again, they're getting held to a higher standard because they're supposed to be the religious, bearers in this. And I'm guessing that they were crummy people, including to their wives and at home. And there does come a time where you got to be like, listen, you can maybe mourn what they should have been, but don't mourn them because they were bad people. And so if you're more like if you're like, oh, my life's never going to be the same without them, that's not helpful to you when you're talking about your abuser. I know that the term grief, when we talk about it today, you are still allowed to grieve for an abusive spouse, of course, but we don't want to grieve in a way that makes them like, oh, I miss them so much and they were the best thing that ever happened to me and I'll never find love again and all that. Obviously we don't want people stuck in that place. It's best for them to get over it. That's a cold way of putting it, but yeah, and it's still grieving, in our modern understanding. But at this time period, I would say it's like, falling into that depression. What usually happens? You fast, you rip your clothes, you separate yourself, you spend time in isolation during your grief. And these people at this time need extreme companionship. They need immediate help. They need to be lifted up because the sons were not good folks. Also, I would say that this is one of those, there are many, to Bray's point, and I think that this is closer to the theological angle I was going to go with here, that there are different strokes for different folks, right? Like different punishments for different people. I don't know everything about these guys, but like there's difference between the Ananias and the guy who gets struck dead. But like Peter denying Jesus was bad too, but
right.
but Peter didn't get struck dead. He's still alive. And it's one of those that like Jesus knows our hearts. God knows our hearts. He gets to make those kind of decisions. And in this kind of case, like maybe there is a special exemption, a special circumstance. In this case, skipping grieving is a good thing or is helpful to people somehow. I don't know. I don't know. I wish we had more information about this. It is very sudden. That's the best I've got. And
putting it on. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. And he's going to turn it to you, and I'd rather you finish this off anyway. To add to Goss's, sounds so sophisticated, point that this is confusing. Aaron himself collected the gold of the Israelites to cast a golden calf and led them in the worship of the idol and didn't get divinely punishment. And punished. He actually got promoted. Well, apparently Aaron, and you know what? It's different rules for different people. Well, the one person who actually is maybe entitled to do that is God, right?
Yeah.
Like,
well, and the idea that this is ending up being mostly on man and not on God makes a lot of sense because like it reminds me of Henry VIII or whatever, who would go pope shopping so he could find somebody to let him get divorced, or whatever.
Right. At some point, yeah, that we're trying to skirt God's laws, and God's like, "Okay, I'm slamming the door on this. We're not doing that." Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, I have to assume these things because, as you mentioned, this is really out of character. And people, like, we bring up stories like Ananias, but the thing is those stories are so shocking because they do seem so out of character, but it's not. Is it out of character for God, or is God simply tailoring the situation to the people? Right. And we know for a fact that God is giving laws. He mentions one of them we talked about already with the any cause divorce in the Old Testament, that Jesus says specifically, I gave that to you because your hearts are hard. You were in a different place now. So we know that things are changing. I don't know if this is a policy that changed. If God came down today, struck a couple people dead for messing around, and I was like, they didn't seem like terrible people. But that's what he decided to do, and was like, hey, get over it. Let's help lift their wives up. Let's get their families back on track, and let's move on. I would trust that God probably had a good reason for it, even if he did this kind of thing today. So it's not necessarily completely out of, I can't lump it all into Old Testament God and insane random murderer, camp, or at least that's what the Israelites wanted him to be. But yeah, at the same time, I struggle with it reading as is, and I have to add a lot of parentheses that aren't there in order to kind of iron this out in my mind. I believe it can make sense, but I have to add things to make it make sense. Yeah.
Do you have anything else in Leviticus? Because almost everything else I have is New Testament.
Yeah, I will say, so we talk about Leviticus and how it is progressive for the time period that they're in. Outside of a lot of blood spattering, there is a good bit about cross contamination. I don't believe that. We've talked about this before. I don't necessarily believe that kosher law was given because it's just so hard to cook pork, right? Like, God could always be like, hey, just cook it to a little higher temperature, right? Cook it longer, right? Like, he could have given them that. But I see why people think that, because God does list it kind of right there with cross-contamination and getting sick and contagious diseases and whatnot.
Yeah.
And of course, this is very, a doctor reading this would be like, that's not the best way to treat this thing. However, the fact that they're treating it all is kind of a big deal. That at the time period, people are just allowed to walk around other people when they're infected, and they could get other people sick. And the Jews are kind of the first peoples to kind of be like, hey, maybe let's isolate them so they're not getting other people sick until they are no longer sick, and then they come back, right? Like, that makes a lot of sense to me. And there's two things about it. One, there's obvious, with on the heels of the COVID crisis, I understand. Listen, I will never side with the state shutting down churches. That was a terrible thing. They did it in a very biased way, depending on what church you were going to, whether you got shut down or not. Different regions were terrible about it. So I don't want anybody to misunderstand that suddenly I'm weak on COVID or something like that. That being said, I find it to be extremely biblical to say, hey, if you are sick, let's give you some internet sermons, as well as, or if you are capable of getting sick, let's do some internet sermons as well as to a live service. Or if you wanted to transfer it online, Christians are called to not get people sick. We're called to heal, first of all, but we are also called to not make people ill. And we might, say principles, but a Christian principle is to heal people and to make sure they're not getting sick and that they're not in danger. And I know there was a lot of if you got sick and died, that's your bad. Right. But what we have here is the foundation of a church that caters to those individuals who are sick, who are infected, who are potentially in potential danger. And they say, hey, listen, let's put you over here. Let's make sure you're well before getting up. So I will turn. I guess your thoughts about that. I do have another point, but it's kind of.
I do really like that, but I'm conflicted on COVID stuff. I understand your position and I respect your position. I feel like modern Americans just do not have any, like, they're so individualism pilled, they don't even care about other people. And so you take these things that get taken for granted in other countries, like the Japanese culture around illness and everything like that, and the fact that they'll, as a culture, they have this inherent desire to protect each other, and so they'll wear things like masks even when they're out and about. Just if they're feeling a little bit under the weather, they put on a mask. Whereas Americans would never do that, like absolutely refuse. And as you said earlier, like it's almost like if you get sick, that's your fault. Like I don't have any responsibility for anything about you. Like if I cough directly in your face and you get sick, that's your problem. And I don't know. I almost think that the state has to step in because people can't govern themselves when it pertains to this, because and it's not like an inherent thing. I'm an anarchist. I truly believe that we should move away from the state, but like people have been so heavily brainwashed to not care about other people. Like they're so atomized that they can't perceive that need. And so something has to exist in the meantime to get them as a stepping stone, to bridge that desire to keep people safe, and obviously COVID regulations, they very, very much so overstep that boundary, but I understand why why it happened, and it feels like we didn't learn the lessons as a result of this. I mean, if it happened again tomorrow, I feel like it would just be a complete repeat of COVID all over again. Everything, the government overstepping, the people understepping. Like, I mean, everybody getting obstinate, people rushing out and buying toilet paper in droves. Everything would just repeat because we learned nothing.
Totally agree. I feel the same vibe from everything. And listen, I just want to make clear, like, we welcome, Aaron and I both happen to be anarchists, but we welcome everybody in the Love First Christians, Republicans, Democrats, however you voted, whatever. Like, we're eager to hear your side, how you feel. I understand this is a deeply gray, flawed, imperfect world, as we read over and over in the Bible, that different things make sense at different times. Like, I just found, like, if the government did it well, like, I might clam up about it. They just sucked so bad at it. America, here's a couple of crazy facts about America. Like, on one hand, sorry, I'm trying to get away from the word crazy. I can't believe I used it again. A couple of nutty facts about America. On one hand, we were the least safe about COVID, right? Like, we infected the most people, got them sick, didn't care. Now, some people argue maybe we were only like top 10 or something because a lot of the countries that are like just behind us kind of didn't report it very well. Right. There are a lot of countries that had like 100 million random people die, but not from COVID, right? Like, so like,
sort of like when whatever, conservatives will make the argument that I don't know, remember if it's Portugal or Spain or something like that is the rape capital of the world. And it's only because they're like very, very diligent in reporting every case. Whereas a lot of times Americans will just sweep that up. Like cops will just sweep rapes under the rug. The rape kits will go untested for decades.
Right. And so our rape rates are really low, but it's not, because right. Yeah. Right. So you get it. At the same time, while we're being super irresponsible with COVID, the average American also thought that 1 in 4 people that contracted COVID died. Like, the fact that those two statistics are both the same, like are both existed in our world, that like on one hand, we thought that there was a 25% chance. Now, here's the thing. I say we, although when we talk about averages, what we're doing here is I'm averaging some people who thought that nobody was dying from COVID, right? There was a bunch of people who thought it was 0 for a long time.
And other people are
And
like
then
50-50, you're going to
other
die.
people thought 50% chance, right? Like,
Yeah.
and so like, because so like we're so divided on that. Like, so the thing is we had it like, well, I say we, but again, it was way overblown how deadly we thought it was. And this made us shut down. We're just like, well, we're all going to die anyway. Like,
Well, I think
right.
like one of the biggest steps, and we're getting away from the Bible, but I want to bring up this one thing is Fauci coming out there very early on and saying that PPE has absolutely no effect. And the reason he's saying this is because he wants to save the PPE that currently exists because they didn't have manufacturing built up to be able to address the need. They wanted to address. They wanted all the PPE that it currently existed to go to the hospitals for the nurse line staff and everything like that are taking care. And that's a noble reason.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he said it had no effect because he wanted it to go to the hospitals means that whenever we had enough production and the government went to change the story to PPE will protect people, which it did, like it objectively did.
Right.
Nobody believed him because he just got through saying that it didn't have any effect.
Right.
It was because I think if he told the truth from the get-go, people would have rushed out and bought it like they did toilet paper. Yeah. And then there wouldn't have been anything for the hospitals. And then we probably had a lot more deaths as a result because the hospital staff that was taking care of the people would have died. And that makes perfect sense. But I don't know. There had to have been a better way.
Yeah. I mean, you could have just, I mean, honestly, we know about that lie just because of the email, right? The email leak. And there are plenty of emails he didn't respond to. You know, he could have just not responded.
Right.
Instead of he elected to lie. And then honestly, I feel maybe he even believed it at the time. Because that's true of many diseases that the protective gear doesn't work for. It did work for COVID, like you said, when we talk about transmissions. Yeah. But you know that there are some diseases where that kind of thing isn't really all that effective. And so I think he actually could have believed that at the time. But I think in attempting to avoid to look stupid, he just said, I lied on purpose. I don't know. I'm not going to defend him. He is a very bad person. That is not his only COVID lie. Fauci's been plenty excoriated. I don't need to do that here. But like, he is, it's unfortunate because and I think the reason you're bringing this up is it made the public not trust anything or anyone.
Everything was a fake. Like, even as soon things as that were objectively proven to be true, they still were fake because nothing's real anymore. Like we've completely detached from reality as a society.
Yeah. I do want to say we got Justin here. He said, love what you do. Justin, thank you for joining us. I appreciate that, man. This is about the last subject, but I like this. God has individualized F around and find out limits. Sorry, it's just the most sound explanation I've heard of. Yeah, I mean, the Bible is heavily paradoxical, if not outright contradictory. And so I think individualism explains a lot of that. Let's hear. Justin also said, and Bray, we're talking about that. This is exactly what's happening with H5 right now. And then Justin saying H5N1's not a joke. Is that the chicken flu, bird flu?
That's the chicken flu. That's specifically the strain that can jump from birds to humans.
Yeah. It could be a big one. He says, Bray says H5N1 started human to human transmission December. Shocking, it's been horrific flu season. My surprise was when I tested positive for type A with both novel symptoms, and the sample was never sent off for subtyping, even though it was supposed to be in case it was H5N1. Yeah, we do a bad job with diseases, man. Which actually,
we're gonna fire a whole bunch of useless people at the the Center for Disease Control because that'll help.
Right. I mean, it's and listen, a lot of these people are useless, but unfortunately, the most useless of them are keeping their jobs, and a lot of the ground workers are losing their jobs. And so this, it's not really going the way it needs to go. But this brings me to my next point, which is the point that I wanted to make about this passage. Listen, the church in Leviticus has already been tasked with feeding people, clothing people, healing people, and educating people. This is actually not something that goes away when Jesus begins his primitive church, right? It's something that did go away with the Pharisees because they suck, but it's something that Jesus brought back. And I think those four things are something that we really need to focus on, because when Christianity was spreading like wildfire, our missions were not sermon places. Like, you could meet somebody who could deliver a sermon there. Of course, there were people who understood theology there. But more often than not, a lot of these missionaries didn't even have a Bible on hand, which is wild to think about, that there were so few of them, right? But, that many of them, if they were gifted a Bible, like even if that, few of them could actually read it, because it was written in Latin and they spoke the language of the people that they were witnessing to, right? Now, some of them, of course, did speak Latin. I'm not saying like nobody knew what the Bible said during that time period. Of course not, right? But you had to work your way up a little bit. And a lot of these missions would just go out there equipped with no scripture. But what did they have? They had doctors, they had teachers, they had a willingness to speak other languages, and they brought in food and they brought in clothing to help the people. And this is when Christianity was really at its best. And it's really something that we need to seriously consider getting back to today. I think there's a place for sermon churches. I like the fact that we have Bibles and theologies. And I don't think that's the problem, is that there's a Bible in every home. In fact, a lot of the most I'm glazing over. I'm sure a lot of you are screaming right now. There's a lot of problems with the church at that time period. And there were. And the ability to read the Bible kind of subverted all their biggest problems, right? Like, this was kind of the issue there. But I do think that there is a divine aspect that speaks to people when we do those things. And that is something that we still have a job to do within the church on a very practical level. I think that churches need to, instead of hiring your pastor, hire a doctor, right? Like, instead of hiring, now a lot of this is illegal in many, and it sucks, but do the equivalent of what you can to hire a doctor. People shouldn't have to go elsewhere to find like a soup kitchen, right? Like, these should be the primary functions of your church: is clothing, food, physical healing, and or medicine, and then what was the education, right? Teachers, right? And I'm talking, I really genuinely believe that that's what Christianity needs to return to. So as bad as a lot of this Leviticus is, and I'm rolling my eyes here, we are getting the groundwork for a lot of what is going to become the primitive church, and the importance of that being established now, so that the Jews kind of wrestle with that as theological leaders, their job, outside of just like doing these ceremonies and sin offerings and whatnot like that, is to keep the people healthy, is to keep the people educated, fed, and clothed. Those are primary tasks of the church, and of course, teaching theology as well. But ultimately, that theology is best taught by meeting people's actual needs.
I'm reminded, you bring up Levitical law repeatedly as being like a way of placating the Jews, so that they or the Israelites, so that they will accept God, even though they're flawed human beings, And given that story of you just told about the fact that God kind of smuggled in good, like wrapped around the bad. I'm reminded of like feeding a dog a pill with cheese. Like he's putting in the good stuff that he actually wants you to get, and wrapping it in the stuff that knows that you'll like, so that you can eat it.
Yeah, it's like, you probably shouldn't be eating cheese, but you need this pill, so here you go, right? Like, right. Yeah, right. And within it, the seeds of the destruction of. I mean, this gets brought up a lot in the New Testament, as they're talking about this Old Testament law, and how it was impossible to practice one law, when you're supposed to be loving your neighbors and caring for them, honoring your parents. And then on the other hand, obeying this law as well. So it's very explicit that many of these do contradict their ways of life. And that's just how it goes, right? Like, ultimately, that pill that they take is going to make the dog have to choose to stop eating cheese, Yeah. So, yeah. Anyway, Aaron, what else did you have for us?
Well, okay, so some New Testament stuff. Let's see.
Yay.
Okay, so Jesus comes across a demon-possessed person.
Oh, yeah.
And they identify themselves as Legion. presumably because there's a whole bunch of spirits. I think they explicitly say so. Like this one man is like infested with hundreds, possibly thousands of demons. And of course, there's the standard questions that you have about what is a demon, theologically speaking, like not pop culture, but like what is it in the Bible? Because it's never been super clear to me, like what it is. Because if humans have free will, then they shouldn't be able to be possessed, presumably, because so what does that even mean to be possessed? But beyond that, in the story itself, the demon requests to Jesus, okay, you're going to cast me out. Fair enough. I get that. You're Jesus. You do your thing. But can you cast me out into those pigs? First of all, Jesus accepts the request and does what the demon asks.
Yeah.
That's weird. And then the demons, having possessed the pigs, immediately go and commit suicide. Which, like, if you're going to be possessing something and you're going to be like, okay, I'll take this lesser creature as my banishment, but at least I'm not going back to hell or something like that, then you immediately kill yourself. Like, what's the point? Like none of this, the story doesn't make sense to me from a variety of different levels.
Yeah, I've looked into this for a while because it's like Jesus even like makes a deal with the devils, which you like. I don't like. I like Jesus in the desert better, where he's telling Satan to get out of his hair, and this is a little bit odd, and the theological explanations for this are all over the map. So I don't have one single answer that people tend to like as best. A lot of people are like, oh, he's displaying his sovereignty over them, where it's like he could just get rid of them and then they're gone. But in this case, people actually get to see, ooh, look how powerful I am. So one of the best explanations that I felt that satisfied me was they wanted to go into the pigs so that they could continue obviously being in this world. Having a corporal body is an important thing to a demon, right? Like it's not like a ghost where it can just go around like picking up pots and banging them together and stuff like that. For it to do damage, it's got to have some kind of material, thing to do. Now, the issue is if it's out in the universe, they're still looking for somebody to possess. I'll get into the free will bit thing in a minute there, but they're going to be looking for somebody to possess. If they're in a body, then they are limited to what's in that body, or at least we know what they're going to do, within the power of the body that they are in. They go into the pigs thinking, oh, okay, cool, we're still in this world. And then the pigs, Jesus has them all commit suicide, because what happens then is now they die in a physical body, sending them to the lake of fire, so as opposed to wandering the universe and looking for another soul to possess. That is one of the best explanations that I can give, but I would be lying if I said that's the only explanation or that it answers everything.
Well, is there a biblical basis for the idea that Jesus, first of all, lacks the ability to dismiss demons to hell rather than just releasing them from their current host? And is there a biblical basis to the idea that if their corporeal body dies, the demon's going to hell rather than being released out into the universe? Like, those things are taken for a given in your explanation, but is there a basis for them?
I mean, Jesus is all man and all God, right? And so sometimes we see that's difficult to reconcile at some points, because on one hand, and one we're going to talk about in a minute here, he's healing the blind, like just by spitting in their eyes, which I can't do, right? Like, so he's using some divine power there, right? But at the same time, I'm like, well, he's confined to what mankind can do, so he has to put them in like the pigs in this body or whatever, something like that. I think when he's dealing with spiritual elements, this is kind of something that he has. I think he has power over the material pretty well. I think when he's in the body of man, he is capable only of doing what man can do.
This isn't the first time in the Gospels. I mean, in Matthew, he excises demons, right? And it doesn't make the point of saying that like he put them in another physical body and then had them killed.
That's
You
true.
know,
Yeah.
so
Right. I mean, that Jesus is okay with having the demons wandering around, right? As opposed to putting them in pigs and then having the pigs go and die. And like the explanation kind of like assumes here that like he does that so that the people in the region are like, wow, it must have really happened because I have a bunch of dead pigs. So
yeah.
maybe we take
Well,
the
and it's like,
biblical explanation and just say that Jesus did that so that other people could be like, why did 2,000 pigs just kill themselves? Oh, because that guy cast out a demon and put it into the pigs. At the same time, I don't get a lot about Jesus paying the guy back, right? Like,
right.
who have
Yeah, I
his
was gonna
pigs
say that
there. I
that
mean,
sheep herds is like putting on the shocked Pikachu face, and
yeah.
he like, God forbid that was his only source of wealth. You know.
Hopefully not, right? Like hopefully Jesus had him in mind, right? Because yeah, not a great explanation for that. I apologize. I wish I had something better for you. It's one
Yeah,
that comes
no.
up every time, and it's one that every time I look this up, it's I get stuff that's all over the map, and so I try to do what makes the best sense for me. You know, try to kind of rationalize all that. But I don't know. I think this is the same reason I don't really love the whole like hardening Pharaoh's heart just so I can show off and then they'll know that I was cool forever and ever kind of thing. It's again the explanation that we're given, but it's the explanation that we're given according to man. Right? Jesus doesn't say like I did this because like I'm cool. And the Old Testament, I guess it does say so that you'll know I'm cool, but at the same time, especially in the Old Testament, we have people putting words in God's mouth constantly. And so I don't know. I don't know.
Well, and that brings me back to the first question I asked in that section, which was stripping out all the pop culture. What is a demon? Like, what is the actual function of a demon in the Bible?
I mean, you play D&D, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. I was like stripping out all the pop culture. I'm thinking of like D&D and Supernatural, the TV show, and all that kind of, all the
yeah,
the red horns and the pitchfork and all, all that good stuff. Like all
sure.
of that. What is the actual biblical, like, are they counterparts to angels? Are they the angels that got cast out? And are they limited in number? Are they like all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So I don't want to lend too much credence to this, but okay. So the word demon is actually borrowed from the Greeks. It is not a Christian idea, and it's not a Jewish idea. This is something that we borrow from them. And so sometimes when we borrow from them, we do so imperfectly, but we do it in a way that Jesus is growing up in a way where people speak Greek, right? So it's like, hey, maybe demon's the best way to refer to this thing that we're casting out, right? But there is a good chance because demons, as far as the idea that we're borrowing from, and I need to understand, like this is kind of like when we borrow the term hell and we're borrowing that from another culture. I'm explaining what it is in their culture, but not necessarily talking about how we're repurposing that word that we're borrowing, right? Like, so in that culture, it's a malevolent, entity. It is it's evil, it's a spirit. So the difference between a soul and a spirit is the spirit doesn't have a body, right? The soul is the combination of spirit and body. So it's a spirit, doesn't not have a body, and it causes harm to either those around the person that infects, around the infected individual, or to the individual themselves. So when we are talking about casting out demons, here is the thing. We could very well be talking about casting out for something like epilepsy.
Yeah,
Right?
that's exactly what I was thinking, is like
Yes.
schizophrenia in this case
Right.
would be entirely appropriate given the story that we're being told.
Exactly.
And so like mental illness, forms of mental illness that are debilitating.
Correct.
Um,
And at the time, they don't really have words for that. So
Yeah.
if Jesus is just repurposing the word demon to mean that, sure. But at the same time, we see Jesus casting out blindness, and he's not giving somebody else blindness. So if he's casting out schizophrenia, why is he giving the pig schizophrenia? Now, and again, he's still talking to somebody, right? Like there is still a legion in there. And I have no doubt that Satan has a lot to do with the harms that befall man, right? Like we see this in Job, that God is good, and whenever something bad happens, it's God kind of allowing Satan to do something for his own reasons, right? So God has allowed this person to be infected with demons for this purpose, I assume, and then casts out those demons and decides to put it into the pigs, as opposed to deciding to just be like, yes, your schizophrenia is now gone, like your possession is now gone, whatever it may be. And I think like I like that explanation the more that I'm talking about it, because I do think that there is a lot of, I think that's how Satan works. We like to think of, I think we think, when we think of the divine and we think of being possessed, like we think of like, oh, this evil spirit taking over our bodies and we're kind of a husk and there's a demon living inside or something. But the demon living inside isn't like, what is it actually doing to us? Like, I think a lot of people can get involved with like addictions, and it can seem like they've got a demon inside of them. And it may be the influence of the devil inside of them, right? That doesn't mean they are demons. It's not this weird, like I'm floating on a wall or something like that kind of thing. But, you know, they are possessed by something, and it's not necessarily their sin, because it's the devil taking it, much like with Job, right? Like the people that they killed, they didn't do anything wrong. They're just, you know, they just got taken over by demons, and God allows us to have those struggles as a challenge to the believers, you know, as a challenge to the people who can cure those things. God allows suffering, you know, and well, among other reasons, but, you know, one of the largest being that we get to walk the path of the healers. We can't do that unless there is something to heal. And so allowing these demons to do bad things, which God, being good, won't do, that he creates an antagonist that is somewhat contained. And so we have these antagonists that we can kind of contain. And yeah, I like the idea that they're a lot more practical, like, as opposed to like floating around and everything. Because to me, that reduces the Bible down to like magic.
Yeah.
And what we see here is almost the opposite of magic. As we read like Leviticus, we're reading like an extremely grounded, fallen, you know, earthly, worldly people that are struggling and grappling with this spiritual journey.
Well, it reminds me of the difficulty in assigning words to things, and the fact that Jesus is borrowing from the Greek and trying to assign words that would be relevant at the time, but don't necessarily make as much sense to us today. It reminds me of the game that I constantly keep shilling to you, which I think you downloaded it. I don't, Indorol.
Yes.
Yeah, so Indorol, for those who are listening, is a Skyrim mod, and it's free. And I highly recommend it to anybody that wants to play it, but you know, give it a try. But there's a quest in there where I'm going to give the very, very Cliff Notes version.
Go.
It's Middle Ages, you know, like the game is set in like a rough Middle Ages, probably in the like 1400s or something like that. And the quest is all about depression. And there's no term for depression in the 1400s. Like they have no language for it. Yeah. And so the characters, it's about a partner following their partner. And they're trying to trace their steps and find out where they went. And she keeps talking about how her partner was infected by this black fog. And that's the term that she just keeps using over and over again, black fog, to try to describe what depression did to them. And it's very, very poignantly written. And I really, you know, I appreciate the fact that they tackled something that wouldn't normally be tackled in that type of game. I mean, you don't play Skyrim and think about, you know, mental illness, you know, as
right.
Or if it happens at all, it's like very ham-fisted, you know. Whereas this is super grounded, super realistic, and very, very much so played with the appropriate level of deference to how debilitating it can be. Yeah, it's very well written, but I'm reminded of it.
Yeah, I think it's we need to talk and think more about it. It's interesting that it is a new concept. I read, I've quoted this a bunch of times, but the Fall of Civilizations, I get a lot of mileage apparently out of that book. And one of them, and I forget which one now, but the leader clearly had depression from a modern concept. But at that time, they just didn't have any word for it, right?
Yeah.
Like he's just sad and lethargic all the time. And, you know, the best they know it is some type of demon or the gods leaving, or the blessing of the gods leaving them or something like that, you know. And it's sad because that's how it feels, right? Like the blessing of God leaving you, and you're just like this sadness and everything. And one of the things that, having gone through therapy myself, one of the things that helped me get through my struggles was being able to name the problem. I think once I had a name for it, and this is not a unique experience, a lot of people kind of feel this way, but having a name for it really released me from that grasp, right? Like being able to say, okay, that's what it is. Let's get this figured out, you know, because until that time, you just think you're losing your mind, right? Like you think they're going to name whatever thing happened to you. Like you're one of one, you know, you're the only person who's ever had it. But it's
not even just mental illness. I think I saw a recent Facebook post that resonated with me. That's like the importance of being able to call, you know, say a kid trans, is that they know that they're not just the screwed up horse, that they're actually a zebra, you know, like, and that zebras are real and zebras exist, and they, you know, they're not just a screwed up horse, you know.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Bray says over here, and appreciate this. It's not a Jewish idea either, and apparently it's not German either. It's Vedic. So demon is derived from Deva, Dravidian god. Demons are just scapegoats to avoid addressing physical mental disorders or to avoid seeing the humanity in an enemy. Yeah. I do think it's good to have like a common, like if you do want to call it all possessed, it's like, oh yeah, I've been possessed. Oh, okay. You know, like we can all like kind of relate to that. But now that we kind of have a modern understanding of it, we can kind of use that to further, to do a little better than just saying that the person is possessed. I think that's the best conclusion. I'm glad we talked about this because I have changed my mind on this now, the more that I've read about it. Bray's other comment has to do with spitting in the eye, so I'll get to that. Yeah. Do you want to talk about spitting in the eye? Or are you ready?
Okay. I mean, I had an order, but the order is arbitrary anyway, so let's talk about that next.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, so I specifically wrote down that it was interesting that Jesus heals a man by spitting on his eyes, and that's in direct contradiction to the Levitical law of the fact that if a man basically excretes in any way, like anything that comes out of a man's body is unclean. So that it specifically included spitting at one point. And it was fascinating to me that like Jesus spurns Levitical law to the point where he not only doesn't follow the rules of Levitical law in a lot of cases, but he also like actively spits in the face of those rules, you know, like
literally. Yeah.
It's not like just the passive stuff. Like we didn't wash our hands before a meal, but like he actively spits on somebody as a result, as a way of healing them.
Yeah. I often cite the minimum of 3 times, and I'm going to upgrade that to now a minimum of 4 laws that Jesus blatantly breaks. And it's funny that we happen to read this at the same week that we read when you're not supposed to do it, right?
It's almost like they had that planned.
Right. It's even one of those that's like, this is a permanent law, like going forward, like you will never do this or whatever. And Jesus, like, yeah, it's just like, I'm not going to do it, right? Like, and as you mentioned, Jesus doesn't need to do it, right? Like the only reason for him to break this law is to show disrespect to the law. Yeah. Because he could just, I mean, as he does with others, heals people's blindness. He opts to use spitting in this case, to spit on his hands or thumbs, right? And then rub the person's eyes, you know, and then rub the person's eyes. And that's all there is to it, is he's showing that the law is completely beneath him and beneath us, that it is there to serve man. One of the verses, and I'll go ahead and bring it up now, not to hijack it, but because I think it works well here. One of the ones we read this week is God's like, man, the Sabbath was meant to serve man, not man to serve the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for your benefit. So as soon as you are doing something on the Sabbath that is hurting other people, you're not practicing it, right? Like, and in this particular case, And it was funny. It's in the Bible, and they talk about it again in A Christmas Carol. It's one of the few that always seems to get cut out, and it drives me crazy. Yeah, again, I say crazy again. Drives me mad that the spirit of Christmas Present, he gets two monologues that are awesome cut out, and one of them is this, where he's so upset because Jesus condemns this practice, because the church, as I've mentioned already, is called to feed people, right? We've already talked about that. Jesus even brings up, and he's like, hey, didn't David, when he was on the run, eat like the food at the temple, even though it was like sacred and he wasn't supposed to, because he had to live? And didn't God approve of that? Because yeah, he has to live, right? Like living is good. That's fine, right? Like, let's go ahead and break that law. Like, there are times where it's like, so during the time actually of this New Testament time period, the Pharisees have begun shutting down on the Sabbath, right? And like, they'll let you sacrifice, but they're not preparing food anymore. As I mentioned, one of the jobs is to feed people, right? And they just say, oh, we don't do that on the Sabbath because we're serving the Sabbath. Well, now all of a sudden you are trying to serve the Sabbath as opposed to the Sabbath serving you, right? Like, these laws are supposed to serve you. If they are not, there is nothing to them. All the laws, I love the way this is phrased, and it's a different passage again, but just that all the law and prophets hang on this, that you love thy neighbor as thyself, right? Like, all the laws hang on that, like, there is no, the phrasing of hang on that, right? That they're all clinging on to that it's all about loving thy neighbor. And as soon as a law is just inconvenient or in the way or not, break it. Right? Yeah. Like, good people just break bad laws. I don't care who gives it. And this is something that we see over and over and over again. Like, in the extreme case, even ones that we obey most of the time, like telling the truth. But as soon as somebody comes knocking on your door looking to execute somebody, we see this happen to David. You just lie. You just say, yeah, he's here, he's sleeping, right? Like, you put a household idol under the sheets, you put the blankets over it and be like, yeah, he's sleeping in there. Don't worry, he totally hasn't run away. So like, all you people are keeping track of him, yes, lie, right? Like, this is not controversial, that we need to lie to save innocent lives sometimes. That's okay, right? Like, these laws are made to serve us for the better. And as soon as they're not serving us for the better, and we're just following the laws for the sake of the laws, and that's, I think, what Jesus is doing here, bringing it back full circle to the spitting. He's like, no, forget this law. Like, the law is only there to serve me, and this is serving nothing right now. So, oh well, I'll just ignore it until it serves me, right? Your thoughts about the spitting in the eyes?
Yeah, just imagining, like, you're talking about the Sabbath and Jesus confronting the Pharisees and be like, so do people not get hungry on the Sabbath? Is that what's going on? Like, people don't hunger, Like, it's yeah. No, that was, you pretty much encapsulated everything that I was thinking about it. Like, yeah, it's very much so a complete rejection of Levitical law.
Yeah. As Bray says, Sanhedrin. Excretion is sin. Jesus spits in hand, adds some dirt, rubs spit mud in a dude's eyes, and cures his blindness. Sorry, it's working. What were you saying? Like, yeah, it's so important for me, because I think this, I want to, I see we've got some listeners here, and so I do want to make this like really clear. Is, to me, this is like one of the things that transformed me from being like an evangelical, that led to me, and I guess I'm still evangelical technically, but like, that led from me being like a cultural conservative evangelical rule follower,
capital E evangelical, to look
to being a true like believer, to having like I just want to say relationship with God, right? Like, as soon as I'm not saying to abandon the law, but as soon as I made the law subservient to loving my neighbor, subservient to doing the right thing, my entire faith rapidly changed. Growth like you wouldn't believe. I mean, I went to theological school, right? Like, I went, that was my major, right? Like, that was the biggest chunk of my life for 4 years. And I did not experience near the change that I did as soon as I was like, you know what? The more I read this Bible, the more I find that obeying these laws, trying to reconcile all the laws that break themselves, is a fool's errand. But I tried. I was the fool, and I was on an errand, and I was trying for the longest time. Abandon that. I beg you, for the sake of your faith and the relationship that you will have with God afterward, to abandon that. Like, and just try it out. Do what Jesus says. If the fruit of the Spirit's not there and I'm wrong, go back, right? Like, if the fruit of the Spirit's not there, then go back to serving the laws and making everything black and white again. But I don't believe it's possible. Like, if you believe in the Bible, then you will believe that the Bible is subservient to serving people. That's all there is to it. It's so transformative to me. And I think Jesus like does it over and over and over again. And we need to stop dismissing those times and making them uncomfortable. People, like, it's sad that like the evangelicals now have a problem with the Sermon on the Mount, and the problem with teaching these verses, then a problem with I even met a Christian the other day who thought we were still under kosher law, right? Like, despite it saying blatantly in there, like, we're rejecting kosher law now, right? Like, because they couldn't get over that the law is the law, and if Jesus broke the law, then he sinned, and then he's not God, and everything like that. Like, and Jesus is like, his explanation for breaking these laws. He doesn't give us an explanation here; he just does it, right?
Yeah.
But his explanation for breaking these laws, whenever called on it, is like, no, screw the law. The law is meant to serve man, not you to serve the law. Like, that's it.
It would have been nice if he said something like ACAB or something like that to, just as he's healing.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, the next one I had was so Jesus does all sorts of miracles, and most of the time he's pretty open about the fact that he's doing a miracle. Presumably, like, the miracles that he's performing are doing a wonder to bring people to the faith.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically when he's reviving the girl who died,
oh yeah,
he goes out of his way to keep his secret. Like, he only brings some of his apostles, and some of his apostles, and the direct, like, father and mother, and those are the only people in the room. And he specifically swears them to secrecy after he's revived the girl. What was the reasoning behind that?
So it's funny because we go from like, I'm doing this to showing off my power with like the pigs, right? To like Jesus being like, I'm specifically trying not to show off. And that's why I think like I like the conclusion we came to, because the idea of Jesus like needing to flex nuts is just stupid to me. Like, it doesn't work right in my head. I understand that like people, like, it works on people like a magic trick sometimes, but this to me makes more sense, like, to behave this way, to say like, listen, I want people to focus on that this girl who is dead is now alive. But what they want to see is they want to see the act. Like, people want to see the magic, right? They want to see what spell you cast. They want to see the lightning. They want to see that moment, right? They don't want to see girl dead, now girl alive.
Yeah.
But that's what we need to see, right?
It robs them of the instant validation, but it gives them the girl back.
Right.
Yeah. The important
What's important?
Part is done. Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. Like, that's the important part. And Jesus does this, like, he does this a lot, right? Like, he does this with the cripple, where he's like, hey, don't tell anybody, and with the reviving the dead girl. He does it on a couple other events too, where he's just like, hey, listen, I'm not trying to show off here. He does it another time in this reading too, where he tells the apostles, even, he was like, hey, don't go blabbing about this, right? Like, let's keep this under wraps. Because what he's trying to do is trying to change the culture without having it to be like Jesus centric. Like, one of the other notes that I made in Mark is that Jesus is like a wickedly good listener. Wicked is probably a bad term. He's an excellent listener. And we want Jesus to teach. We want him, but anytime he's preaching, it's usually because a bunch of people surrounded him and we're like, preach. And he's like, all right, I'll say a couple words if that's what you guys want. But he's constantly running into people and being like, what's your name? What's your job? Where are you from? Now, the thing is Jesus, being Jesus, knows about this. In fact, on a lot of times he's like, yeah, I already knew all that stuff, right? But I wanted to hear you say it. Like, I want to talk to people. I want to listen to people, I want to actually have a discussion with people. And Jesus is so good at that, like, listening process with us. And like, he is making himself not the focal point. which is hard for us to believe when we talk about, even when we call ourselves Christians. We think of that's like so centered, right? This is how Christ was. But the whole idea was, where is the Christianity? Is it in Christ, or is it in having a dead girl and bringing her back? Is it repairing a relationship between a father and a son? Is it making sure that that gay or trans kid feels comfortable at home and learns to understand themselves and their feelings, right? Like, this is the miracle. We want to see something flashy. We want to see like God peeking down from the heavens, but God constantly chooses not to do that and chooses instead to play a backup role, because we're called to be the body of Christ, right? That's just not as, it's not as much flair as what we want, but it is the right thing to do. You know, ultimately the girl was dead, then the girl was alive, and that's what matters. And we want to be in the room where it happens, but Jesus is training us, because he's going to be gone. We're never going to be in the room where it happens almost ever in our lives, right? So what we're going to have to do is only hear these stories, right? Like when we hear a story, Aaron, about good or evil, right? We need to be able to assess it for what it is, even though we're not like right there, you know? Yeah. If I didn't have access to the internet or newspapers or news or anything like that, I don't know anything about what's going on, good or evil, all over the world. You know, but I need to be able to assess what is good and what is evil, even if I'm not there and ready to make those kinds of assessments. And when I hear about them, because I do have the internet, I need to be able to say, hey, this is a really good thing, or hey, that's a golden statue of Donald Trump. That's maybe not the best. You know, I need to be able to assess good and evil, as opposed to just being like, oh, well, I wasn't there, I don't know. Like, you know,
right.
You know, we need less people that is like, man, this is a frustrating thing for me, and I apologize if this derails everything, but people that are like, I won't believe like this person committed sexual assault, even though they got convicted and there's overwhelming evidence, until I like have all the evidence in front of my desk on the computer, like, or like literally I can touch it and feel it. And then I'm like, okay, like, cause then they'll just say like all the videotapes are doctored, all the names are written by an FBI agent, all the whatever. And I'm just like, man, like you are proposing. I'm reading a book currently about QAnon. Like a lot of it's actually just stories and the people who like believed it and what happened to their families and whatnot.
Yeah.
And the level of proof that they needed, it wasn't even a level of proof. It was like there was no way to give them any proof. Like there's nothing you could do, even if you cited like a Fox News and OANN, right? Like you use their own sources, right? Like you try your best to reach them. And they just would worm out of it constantly.
Yeah. The CIA and the FBI and everything like that, they're simultaneously incompetent, but they're also all powerful.
Right.
Like it's whatever needs to be to fit the narrative. Like they just worm out of everything. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just frustrating. And so I think like Jesus is teaching us that we need to be able to be like, listen, I need to be able to make an assessment about whether this is good or bad. And not just because I saw the miracle happen right in front of me, right? The people he brings along are the people who kind of need or deserve to see it, right? And the rest of us need to be able to make assessments, you know, based on the works, right? Like based on the fruit. Ray says here, a question about this one. How close was this miracle to woman? What do your problems have to do with me? It's not time yet. I believe you're quoting a Bible verse here. And so let's find out how close it was.
Is this the same story as the one where the woman comes to help about her child that's ill and she's a Gentile? Because we talked about that one back in Matthew, but it was repeated here again.
It's in John 2:4. Now that doesn't obviously the Gospels. This could still be around that time period based on the story here. I don't know how. Now John chapter 2 is going to be pretty early into the ministry. I don't know, Bray, to answer your question. I would need a lot of time to put that together. or at least more. I would need to do some internet searching that I probably shouldn't do live because that's just boring. I'm not Vosh. I can't like type and search and make it entertaining at the same time. I wish I could, but I'm not. But anyway, I don't know. I'm sorry. That'll be a conversation. Here you go. Shout out to the Discord group. If you want to have that, I can figure that out during the week. And if I remember, we can talk about it then too. Referring to the wedding. Also props to Miriam, because if I called my mom woman, I would have gotten expedited shipping to the gates. Yeah. Remember Home Alone where he's Macaulay Culkin calls his mom dummy, Kevin. And I'm just like, oh boy, that would have been the end of my world right there.
Yeah.
Like
clearly permissive parenting gone wrong.
Yeah. Well, in that case, it probably was pretty close then to if the wedding's what you're talking about, because the wedding's his first miracle that he does, the water into wine. And if it's chapter 2 in John, then those two are close together. Not sure the point you're making, but I'm sure you've got one. The reason that those two are somewhat close together. But yeah, anyway, I had one that let's see, we had was it just Jesus being good listener? Never mind. I managed to wedge it into yours, which
fair enough.
Listener. Yeah.
I had one more. Okay, so I thought it was really funny. So I brought up a couple weeks ago when we were talking about Exodus, how ridiculous the Israelites were being in the desert. And like every step of the way through the desert, they would come to Moses and be like, oh, you've led us into the desert to die. We're all going to die. I can't believe you betrayed us. All that kind of ridiculous stuff after he's saved them from literal slavery. And they've all witnessed like miracles happening constantly in the form of the plagues and, the Red Sea parting and all this like majestic stuff. And every step of the way, God has taken care of them. And every step of the way, they're doubting. And Moses never in Exodus is shown to be exasperated by this, because I would be over the moon frustrated with my people if like really whereas I love the fact that so we just got through 2 back-to-back scenes of Jesus turning loaves of bread and fish and multiplying them in massive quantities. And his disciples get on the boats with him, and they realize that they've gotten on the boat and they've only got 1 loaf of bread to share between all of them the entire boat trip. And they're fighting about the fact that like there's not enough bread to go around. And Jesus is like, really, guys? Like he visibly gets exasperated with them. And it's so cathartic compared to Moses. Like, this is what I need. The sassy Jesus. Like, we need more of him.
Jesus, when he's talking to Peter, and he calls Peter Satan in our readings this week as well. Jesus is not when he is dealing with in his faith. Jesus is rough, right? Like he is taking people to task and holding them to the higher standard, right? Like whether it's the Pharisees or his own apostles, he's like, nope, your standard's way up there. So anytime you guys are messing around, and I guess that echoes what we see in Leviticus too, right? Like the Levites messing around is way worse than just, Judah messing around, If you are, and I feel this viscerally, man, reading about like the mega churches and like Daystar and like the people that got preyed on by these televangelists and like the people that still get preyed on by these like cultural anti-cultural Christian, like, big TV Joel Osteen type phenomenons. Like they're so bad. Like, and it feels so much worse in my soul to hear this than to hear like, I can listen to an atheist rip on Christianity for forever. It does nothing to me, right? Like I've read, I think 4 books by Richard Dawkins, right? Like I'm trying to think if it's even more, but like it doesn't hurt me at all, right? Like I don't feel anything, but I gotta say, like reading In Defense of Christian Nationalism or The Case for Christian Nationalism by Stephen Wolfe, like I had to put it down. My soul felt so disgusted at some points, right? Like I just, it's so yucky. Like when I hear, listen, I hear thieves all day, right? Like I see the IRS, right? Like they're thieves. They're blowing people up. They're bad people. I have no expectations for government, right? Like in the IRS being bad people. I'm aware, right? Like when they're extorting people. But when I see like a Christian, and especially like a popular Christian, being like, if you don't write that $100,000 check, God's not going to give you all the blessings that he wants to give you. Like our new faith office leader person now has said in their history. And I'm just like, man, like the illness that I feel from that is so much worse than the other one, because it's like the other is bad, right? Like Caesar sucks. Jesus is not like a big Caesar fan. But the Pharisees are the problem. They're the first problem. They're maybe the only problem. It's just, yeah. I guess I've talked it out there, but like the expectations I have are just higher.
To relate it to politics also, like I hear Nancy Pelosi say something batshit insane. And I should not curse. I'm sorry. I hear her say something and it just doesn't faze me because I know that she's evil. Like, I know that intellectually. But when I hear somebody who professes to be an anarchist and therefore speaks on the same level of authority as, my ideology, and they're leading people astray with ridiculous nonsense, it hurts so much worse. It's exactly what you're saying. When false theology is coming out of your in group, it's particularly awful.
Yep. Had the exact same moment that Trump being Trump doesn't bother me a lot. Yeah. But people like religious people like selling out to him, like there's just it's just worse. It's worse. Right? Like I have no expectations of politicians. I do have expectations of Christians. And we see a lot of that. I did find one more, and I know we're a little over like the Bible section, but whatever. Let's see. There was one more. People who wink it wrong cause trouble, but a bold reproof promotes peace. Really goes in line with what we're talking about right now, as far as how we react when somebody does that. I cannot stand it because I have seen Christians do this a lot, as well as like anarchists and libertarians and other people in my circles, that there are troublemakers and they're bad people and they wink at them, right? Like they're making friends with them. They're making pals, right? And it says a bold reproof promotes peace, that there is no peace when Christianity is playing footsie with the devil, right? Like when you as a religious leader are over there and just being like, I don't love all the ways he says this, but we're pals, like we get along, we're having a lot of fun here. Whereas I just think, and listen, this is a bold reproof. I'm not saying you have to be like, you all are going to hell because you voted Democrat or voted Republican, right, or whatever, like something stupid like that. But just to be like, hey, just so you know, Christian nationalism is unacceptable, right? Like just say it, right? Like just straight up, just be like, hey, listen, I'm not going to wink over there to the Christian nationalists. I'm going to try to make them not Christian nationalists. I'm not going to not witness to them, but we do need that bold reproof because that's what promotes peace. What we see a lot with our conflicts happens a lot because we have failed to give it that bold reproof. That Christianity was kind of floating into this, it floated into nationalism. Like there wasn't a moment that everybody was just like, that the majority of Christians just said we're nationalists now. It just happened because there weren't enough Christian leaders with, frankly, the cojones to be like, no, none of that, right? Like, hey, at some point, like I do the pool analogy a lot, but I think what makes the most sense when you see a Christian dipping their toe into sin, tell them to get away from the pool, right? Like be like, nope, away, right? Like get out of there. As opposed to you watch them dip in a toe and then an ankle and then and like, that's what happened. And that was actually their plan. Like, unfortunately, this was a politically maneuvered plan to make, Christians vote like idiots. And unfortunately worked rather well to just kind of slowly be like, hey, maybe if we get them to accept a little bit of like anti-immigrant stuff here and there, it's a long path, but we'll get them there. And then they get you there. And then they say, okay, well, maybe they'll be okay with a lot of war, and it's an uphill battle. We'll start with a few small skirmishes or whatever. Oh, cool. They got on board with that. Maybe they'll be on board with a police state. And I see them pull and pull and pull and pull. And now I'm to the point where this Christian leader is now posting golden images of himself and declaring himself a king and a whole bunch of other things that I can even point out Christians who just 8 years ago were like, oh, look at these people who think they're kings, these politicians, the evil idols and stuff like that. It's that slow ebb towards it. And unfortunately, not enough Christians were bold enough just to be like, hey, to keep the peace, I got to condemn this, right? Like, this is a line I'm not crossing.
Well, and this sad part is, and I'm going to make this about me for a second. It's really alienating to constantly do that and constantly put yourself out there as unapologetically anti what Christianity stands for. It's because we've gotten to the point now where they're the majority. So constantly railing against them, it's very isolating, because you only have a small community of people who think the way that you do, and you stick yourself out there and you get, frequently ostracized from your communities. I've certainly lost a lot of Christian friends because of my stances, because they're unwilling to move away from the propaganda and they want me to shut up and stop talking about it,
Yeah.
And it's a hard path to walk.
I basically get a daily message on average. Some days 3, some days 0. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But probably an average about a message of a day, a person who's seen something that I wrote and decided to message me personally, the part that's like, and I will say I never knew you, right? Like, I will cast you out. Like, I am the heretic. Yeah. I'm the evil guy. I'm the bad guy. I'm the villain. Whereas really if I was saying this in the 1950s, Christians would just be like, yeah, right. Like, this is standard stuff, and we've got to the point where people are just dismissing. We've talked about this before, but you'll just quote the Sermon on the Mount and they're just like, this is just woke.
Yep.
Like, I dismiss Jesus, right? Because this is woke. That's where we're at. We don't get there from 1950s to 1950 to 2025, in a day. Yeah. It's this slow. We winked at it,
and we're not going to go back to the more proper place,
right,
in a day either.
Right, and
I long Sisyphean struggle.
Yeah. And I don't want to go back. Like, I believe all this difficulty is for a reason. And I don't want to, I'm not going to whitewash 1950s Christianity.
Right.
Plenty of problems there. Yeah. But like, all this is happening for a reason. But you mentioned the Sisyphean struggle. Sisyphus-ian, that dude struggle or whatever. It's just this constant push. But yeah, we're in the middle of a backslide, right? Like with The Rock, no doubt. And it hurts. And it's hard. The Christians, we are large. I'll be honest. The Love First Christians has a lot of ex-evangelicals. I mean, there's no two ways about it. It's just the way we were set up. We are a lot of Christians that have kind of rejected the teachings of man and decided to focus more on the lessons and morals that God has for us. We focus more on love. We focus on the Holy Spirit. Like, that's just. And so it was always going to be that way. I'm not anti having evangelicals in the group. It's just they're not going to want to join a place that's called Love First Christians, right? Like, that is an evangelical. Most of them will hear that and just be like, that place sucks. I'm not going to go there, right? Like, they just know. And so we have kind of naturally had a lot of this. But the thing is we are small. But the faith among somebody, I wish I could tell this to more people, like the faith among somebody who is gay and decided to still be a Christian is astronomical. Like, I cannot even tell you the level of faith that these people have. Like, because they're constantly bombarded with these verses, taken out of context, mixed translated, whatever you want to say, even if they are translated correctly, like we've been talking about, the Bible is sometimes the word of man, Sorry. And then God, and I believe it gets left in because God's like, hey, that's the word of man. And hey, you in the current generation, let that be a lesson to you. A lot of people are going to bring up the word of God and it's actually the word of man, right? Like, and so I have no problem with that. But I used to have a problem with it. It's a difficult thing. And like your faith has to utterly collapse. And most people are just going to leave it behind, right? Like nobody wants to, like if your plane blows up, you don't want to put it together and salvage it, right? You're just going to go find a new plane, you know, like put something else new together. But the people who are like, actually, I felt something like at moments, right? Like God calling to me in these certain verses that I was asked not to look at anymore, right? We like my church stopped quoting the Sermon on the Mount, but that part really spoke to me, you know, and like all these other messages, and they've decided to get it back together. And so while it's isolating and it's a tough journey, and like these people's faith are really powerful, but the payoff, like the strength of faith that they have, and I think the communion with the Holy Spirit that people clearly have in our group is like really awe-inspiring to me. And if it weren't for so many, like, or I guess so few, even the few ex-evangelicals, the few people who kind of left the faith before putting it back together again, like if it weren't for them, I would still be in my old ways, you know. It was their constant challenging, you know. I had read the Bible, of course, and of course I was challenged by these, but I put it to the side. I hung it up, you know. But then there are people who are like, nah, Hody, I got to bring you back to the Sermon on the Mount here, man. Like I got to bring you back to the Sermon on the Mount. And I kept coming back and I'm like, this is getting more and more challenging, right? And the more I, you know, read verses of Jesus breaking these laws, right? Like I'm able to ignore them for a little bit, but if you have enough people who still believe in Jesus Christ, but they're like, man, you got to think about what's actually happening here. I don't know. My faith is so like my heart feels bigger today and my faith is a lot stronger. I've received like such, it's lonelier, right? Like I would receive a lot more mainstream popularity, no doubt, if I was just a conservative. It would be very easy, right? Like in fact, I had it, right? Like I was a you know, GOP strategist, good job, great. You know, everybody accepted what I was teaching as whatever. And it's very easy to block the occasional person who's like, hey, I don't think your anti-gay stuff is very cool, right? Like it's very simple as opposed to enduring the constant ridicule. But I have like just, I am a better person now and I feel better and my life is better. I could point to financial opportunities that I missed out on. I could point to family members that have cut off contact with me and friends and stuff like that. And like, sure, all those are very real practical things that I did pay. And I do feel those payments, right? Like, I'm not saying that they don't exist, but my life is better without those things and having what I have now. And yeah, I guess I derailed it, but I should let you kind of bring it back in, but that's how I feel about it.
You echoed exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Let's see. Bray, going back to the reason he was asking about this, he was hesitant at the beginning of his ministry because it wasn't quite time yet. And I'm just curious if it falls in the timeline between the wedding and when he started beefing publicly with the Sanhedrin. Oh, that makes sense. So like before he's actually officially started his ministry, that's very possible. That's true. Because yeah, he did the water into wine thing before he was ready to really do Showtime. Let me see here if I had anything else. I think that's actually all I had as far as my notes. Did you have anything else?
No, that was it for me.
Okay, cool. Yeah, there's some that I just noted in the Discord that I was like, I like this verse, but there isn't much to analyze, right? Like,
right.
You know, hatred stirs up quarrels, but love makes up for all offenses. It's not particularly deep, but I like it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about some stuff in the news here.
Well, let's start with I was going to say
yes.
I was going to say light, but it's not light. It's actually pretty heavy, but it's not political. The woman who just recently passed away, the actress.
The Gossip Girl.
Well, I know her from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Or Buffy. Yeah, sure.
I can't remember her name. But that's
Michelle Trachtenberg, man.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I saw that this morning.
Yeah. Liver issues, apparently. She's only 39.
Yeah, I saw that. And people said, yeah, kind of like some jaundice and maybe liver issues. And the police said no foul play suspected. That's really sad. I don't know. Like,
I
I
don't
guess,
normally pay attention to actors and celebrities and stuff like that, but
yeah,
I just remembered her from. I really liked Buffy. Yeah.
it's a good one. Yeah, a lot of all the cool kids like Buffy, or all the not cool kids like Buffy, which made it cool, right?
Yep.
Like, yeah, yeah. You know, it's funny on in light of the also what they just revealed that like Matthew Perry had like a lot of like ridiculous amount of ketamine. In fact, I think I even see a story up here. Yeah, 27 shots of ketamine in his final days. Like,
I don't know who Matthew Perry is, so I'm guessing it's a sports thing.
no, from
No.
Friends. You don't recognize
Oh.
his face.
Oh yeah. No, I didn't. I didn't watch Friends.
Chandler.
Oh, okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, like, you know, they're not, you know, I can't suspect anything for Michelle Trachtenberg because I don't know what was going on. I don't know. I heard the dying tapes. Do you remember the Michael Jackson death by any chance? Like, I remember hearing the
I.
tapes of him being out of it when they're putting him under that like medically induced sleep or whatever.
Oh wow. Yeah. No,
And it
I
was
never digged into it. So that's ghoulish that they would even release that.
a little, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was just so, I mean, anybody who's heard it has been like, there's going to be cheering fans. It's going to be the best tour ever. And he's like, just out of it, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's the equivalent of when we put a boxer who's clearly got brain damage, like we keep sending him back to the ring.
Yeah.
Like, at some point, you need to tell people to stop. Now, I
Well,
don't
it's a
feel
little.
comfortable saying
It
this with Michelle because I don't know that,
right.
you know,
Well, I mean,
did you drink? I don't know. Like, I don't know.
a
Yeah.
non-hostile version of this is when people upload videos of their children who have just gotten out of dental surgery, and
Oh, yes.
they're still on the anesthesia or the medication, whatever it is. It's not anesthesia per se. It's the makes you loopy. I don't remember what it's called exactly, but
Yeah.
like I don't know. I feel like even those videos, which are almost always comedic and they're never like super heavy or anything like that, it still feels like you're catching people when they're not like able to have any inhibitions and they're not, you know, able to regulate themselves. I don't know. I feel like it's always weird when those videos get posted.
Yeah.
And you know, like and that's the light version of those things. But you're talking about like the Michael Jackson death tapes. That's I didn't know those things existed, and
No.
that's awful. You know,
Yeah.
like for all the bad that he's done, like from what I remember of Michael Jackson, he was not a good dude. Um, like the Neverland camp or whatever.
Sure.
Um, like I don't know. Nobody deserves to have to go through that.
Yeah. Well, and Michael Jackson was a broken person. I think there's never, I think we say this almost too much to the point where we kind of focus on it more than we should. There is, of course, not a good excuse for carrying your hurt forward, right? Like, it's still your fault. It's still your sin, as we would say in, like, you know, Christianity. But there's still there's still treatment, right? Like, if we just say no excuse, okay, no excuse, sure, but there's still treatment that you need for it, right?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
it's the are we just going to go with the wages of all sin being death and death penalty to all, right? Like, obviously these sins come from someplace. You know, is there a difference between somebody who is just kind of a compulsive liar and somebody who is like, when they were young, their parents would overreact and brutalize them for, you know, admitting if they broke a lamp. And so they've kind of learned to become liars. And so they're traumatized by that. Yes, you still shouldn't lie, regardless of the reason. But of course, it should garner a lot of sympathy from us, right? Like, it should make us think like, oh, well, these people aren't bad people. They're just going through some things, you know? And like, I really like the phrase. I don't, you know, and I don't know if it's true 100% of the time. But I do live my life to the idea that there aren't really bad people so much as just broken people.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that we just leave broken, you know? And unfortunately, a lot of people that we leave broken find themselves in positions of power or positions of celebrity. And again, not comfortable at all saying this. Like, I think Michelle is bringing up this conversation, but I don't know if this is true for her. I don't know if she drank or if it was just like had a liver disease, right? Like, I mean, my brother had one of those, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to just like dismiss her lifestyle, but there's a lot of, you know, especially with Michael Jackson, especially with Matthew Perry, especially with boxers, like we just look the other way one too many times. And Robin Williams, that there are people who knew these stories of sadness, and we just kind of were like, well, but that's their art, right? Like that's the price we pay to have this thing. And that's not like that is not a necessary price that we pay to have this thing.
The nice thing is I think that's changing. Like you know, like I think people as a rule are starting to come around to the idea that we shouldn't sacrifice people for their art. Like I'm reminded of stories like I don't remember, Simone Biles, I think her name was, the Olympic athlete, you're talking, I think you're muted maybe.
I was, yeah. I just said gymnast. Yeah.
Gymnast, that's right. Yeah, so like there's a story juxtaposing both her and a Russian gymnast from like the 70s or something like that. And they were both in the exact same situation where they were told, you've got to complete this set. It's going to be amazing and everything like that. And Simone felt like she wasn't capable of doing it. Like she knew her body. She knew like, I'm not capable of doing this right now. I'm not in the right emotional state.
It was the Olympics before the last one.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
She got what's it called? Like the twisties or where you're unable to locate yourself while you're in the air, which I would have, by the way, if somebody tossed me like that, I wouldn't have.
But she was like, she was castigated as being un-American and all that kind of stuff. And probably a lot of it was due to the fact that she's a black woman, and you know, there's all this inherent negativity towards that anyway. Yeah. But she knew her body. She knew she wasn't capable of doing it, and she didn't do it. And you know, she said, deal with it. Yeah. And it's juxtaposed with this Russian woman who was put in the exact same situation back in like the 70s or whatever. She was pressured into doing it, and she ended up failing as she predicted that she was going to. And if I remember right, she either was completely paralyzed or she was killed. Like she fell while she was
oh my gosh,
in the middle of the routine. She fell like on her neck or something like that and was killed. Or paralyzed. I can't remember what the story was exactly. And then another thing I was thinking of as you were bringing up that example was when we're talking about like entertainers, Bo Burnham made a really big push to normalize talking about mental illness in creators. And like, Can't Handle This Right Now, the song, I like it's hilarious, but it's also incredibly sad. And it's the music video Can't Handle This from Bo Burnham. I recommend everybody give it a watch. It starts out really funny, and he ropes you in for like like a 7-minute song, so he goes on for quite a while. But the last like 2 minutes are just haunting. Yeah.
Talking about Kanye West tour?
Yeah. Yeah. He starts out. I mean, this is before Kanye West was Nazi posting and everything like that. This was back in like 2017 or something like that.
So, way back in 2017.
Yeah, right.
Making me feel, similar to other songs, and these are actually songs that I really like. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Take a listen.
Yeah.
Bo Burnham in general, like he's got a bunch of bangers. His early stuff is a little rough around the edges, so to speak. But his new stuff, like his Inside, he put out a whole album called Inside, and it is very, very good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead and link a copy to that in the chat. So if you're listening to that, you can have some of that if you're on the chat. I'll give that a listen to after this. Let's see here. We had something that I wanted to bring up here. I'm going to go ahead and share this tab here. First of all, hypocrisy at its finest. Elon Musk companies have received $38 billion in government support, with the bulk of it just coming last year. nearly 2/3 of the funds in the last 5 years and $6.3 billion in 2024 alone. He just recently tweeted that if NPR is going to live, then they should survive on their own. And I say the same to you, Mr. Musk, the same to you. Also, what
famous interview that Elon Musk did with his brother. His brother's name is like Wendell or something like that, or Wimble or something. I don't remember what his brother's name is exactly, but he's being interviewed with his brother, and they're talking about their startup days working for Zip2 or whatever Elon did when he first came over. And two major things came out of that interview where the brother jokes about the fact that they came over illegally. And this was back in like 2013 or something like that, where illegal immigration was not like this major issue. And he was just openly joking about it. And Elon was like, but he didn't actually contradict his brother, which that was fascinating. But also the fact that the brother was openly talking about the fact that they had received so many government subsidies, and that if they hadn't, the business probably would have gone under and they would have been destitute. Which both of those were fascinating to hear, and Elon doesn't contradict either one of them. He balks a little bit at the illegal immigration one, but he doesn't like correct the story or anything. But yeah, we're at that point now where it's like, if you're rich enough, laws don't apply to you. So, and that's kind of where we're at now. Like, Elon is rich and he's useful to the administration. And if he stopped being useful, I bet you anything there would be a story out the next day about how his immigration was found to be fraudulent or something like that.
Oh, sure. Right. I mean, that's what they would be pushing for, right? I'm sure he wasn't like for all the Obama wasn't born in America. Here we have somebody who we know isn't born in America, right? Right. So this is that was just something interesting. I didn't even really want to talk about that, just so much as point out what a charlatan I find that most of these people are.
And another thing is, like, he's actually addressed the fact that Tesla, for instance, still receives tons of government subsidies. Like, for instance, there was this contract that was initially started under the Biden administration for Tesla electric vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
It was supposed to be for $400,000.
Yes.
And under the Trump administration, it was actually expanded, and it was actually expanded to $40 million for armored. I don't know if it was Cybertrucks or if it was just Tesla.
I remember this story. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Trump realized the amount of backlash it was getting because it was dragging away from the Doge narrative of him cutting government at the same time as being benefiting by government.
Yeah.
And so he ended up pulling it, but only after criticism. Like, if it hadn't been like so heavily criticized as the obvious hypocrisy that it is, it wouldn't have been pulled. So.
Right. It's like we're supposed to be treated like we're stupid because it's like, I'm not actually doing it. It's like, well, you're not actually doing it because it got pointed out.
Right.
Like, it's not like, oh, I was never doing it. It's like, now that you've called me out, I'm not going to do it.
Now that you caught me with my hand in the cookie jar.
Right. Exactly.
I wasn't actually reaching for cookies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the important thing, and I don't want to bring my politics in this too much. I want to stick to like my Christianity. But the reason I'm talking about this is because it's about like faith. Like, these are people who are like kind of pretending to represent your faith, but they are not living it, right? Like, how often they talk about like, oh, we need to shrink the government. Okay, well, they've done no different than. It's funny because they're so good at calling out Democrats about this, but like when they cut like something that's a fraction of 1%, which frankly, all this has been a fraction of 1%. Even like conservatives, I've seen reporting this, right? Like Liz and Robbie on like Reason, we're talking about this. Like, we're looking at 0.1% of the budget when we're talking about these like massive layoffs, right?
Yeah.
And what they're expanding with what they want to spend way outspends all of it, right? Like, it's funny because they're talking about the budget office is expanding more debt, and they always outspend even the approved debt, right? Like, this happens all the time. And so government's getting bigger, but in the hands of fewer people.
Right.
That's not smaller government. That's more power in fewer hands, right?
Right.
Like, if anything, I would rather you hire 1 million more people and actually decrease the size of government. That way there's less government in more people's hands.
Right.
And the thing is like, again, that's my politics. I don't expect everybody to have those politics. It's the fact that they're liars, right? That they are charlatans. They know what they're doing is not true, right? And so you should know what they're doing is not true. It's that wink to evil kind of thing, right? Like, I'm not going to pretend that these people think, like, believe what they're doing. They're just not doing it, you know? Yeah. There's, I mean, you've eviscerated them. I've eviscerated them. I did want to, this is the main one I wanted to do here. So here's the thing. It's going around. It's becoming famous because there is a picture of this with Trump as a golden statue. That is just that. And that's the reason I even searched this video.
Seconds long. You just play it in its entirety.
I'm going to play it because I'm going to pause it at some moments probably, but I want you to understand this is an AI generated video of what Trump taking over the Gaza Strip would look like, what the Gaza Strip will look like after.
Is it? Oh, it's muted.
Oh yeah. Well, here, can you hear this? I don't.
Yeah, now I can hear it.
Okay. What's next?
Donald is coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear.
Okay. Obviously, the AI thought bearded bikini men was a good idea, which, frankly, to me, not offensive at all. But I know, like, they didn't even do the work for the conservatives who would be offended by this.
Well, they're not expecting anybody to actually pay attention,
right? Like, right? They're just like, oh, it looks like, look how much fun they're having, and I'm like, right? Those are
bearded belly dancers.
Bearded belly dancers, right? Which I think is great, but I know for a fact they don't think is great. Whatever. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Big. We're gonna have big Trump heads.
Shining bright, golden future, a brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump does.
Elon Musk is just gonna be throwing his money all over these people, right? Like, he's gonna be eating his little dish and throwing money, and everybody's
number one. Trump does a shining bright, golden.
There's the picture that everybody's getting offended over, and they should be. This is bad.
That's
their Bible verses
about dictator stuff.
Yep, this is what dictators do. They talk about this in the Bible about not building graven images. There's a lot to talk about. Like it's funny because the verse about not doing graven images isn't even just idols. It's just like you're not supposed to be like propping human beings up like this. It says not to even do it among beings in heaven, like much less people on earth or like below the earth is what the verse says. So this is wrong on many levels, but of course Donald Trump has never read the Bible and is only LARPing Christianity. And it's surprising that his big government faith office didn't catch that this probably wasn't a good thing to do. But, we're assured over and over by these people that he's super faithful and he asks deep religious questions. He just,
Future, a brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, number one.
See that last scene right before the very end thing
with him and Netanyahu.
Well, Netanyahu. That's good. That makes sense. Yeah, just buddy. Yeah, I couldn't tell if it was like it looks like a composite of Putin and Netanyahu, but
a little bit, yeah. But this is, I like how he still looks bad even in the AI. Like they're still like, you're still fat. There's so many things wrong with this. In addition to the fact that this is supposed to be the Gaza, these are people's homes that you're kicking them out of to make way for this resort.
These are
dedicated to
hundreds of years old olive trees that have just completely like bowled over, so that we can have parking lots.
It's so bad. Like I don't even know what to say. Like I like at first, and I commented on it because I saw the story and I couldn't believe that he shared it. I recognized that it was probably part of a video, and I was like, oh well, let's see this whole video. Like you know, it's probably like I thought that this was, I mean, it was bad, but I figured this was probably just the worst part. And I was like, this isn't even the worst part of the video.
This
Like,
honestly reads like a leftist satirizing Trump.
yes.
Like this is what somebody would do to make Trump look bad, except he himself posted it.
Right. Yeah, like let's see here. This is the there's another one I wanted to share. It just goes hand in hand with this thing here, right? Which is let me see if I can find the picture. Let's see here. Posted this one. I'm gonna share this. Sorry, it's just a bunch of images, but the long live the king.
Yep.
Like he posted that from the White House Twitter account, like calling himself a king. Dude, so guys like Rand Paul, I believe it's a tweet from 2014, but we're like, oh, here, Obama, here's your like starter pack, you know, for you tyrant. And it's like, here's your scepter and your crown and your whatever, like, you know, you want to be king or whatever. I should look up exactly what Rand Paul said, but I just commented on it. It was like, can I get an update on this post? Because like, you just barely endorsed this guy like after the election, oddly, but was like, oh, Trump's doing all the right things. And I'm like, posting this?
Yeah.
Like, this is really bad. I don't know. I like it is validating everybody who said that he's a wannabe tyrant. And I'm sorry, like, if you didn't see it, I hope you're starting to see it.
Yeah.
Like, this is bad. And it's playing out in real policy. He is making himself a king. Like, even if I don't want to say it's like the last, well, we've already had the last elections we'll ever have at or anything like that. But like like they're moving forward with this in Gaza. They're shipping people
Trump's
out.
already made allusions to the idea that he'll be reelected. Like he's like, or my third term or something like that. You know, like he's talked about stuff like that. So, you know, go alongside his king posts. You know, he's talked about breaching the Constitution like that as well. So,
yeah, it's nutty times we live in. Aaron, did you have anything else that you wanted to add this week?
No,
I feel like I dominated the time, but I always appreciate you.
Yeah, no. I you brought up stuff that I was going to talk about anyway. The Trump Gaza ad was definitely on the forefront of my mind. Oh, interesting that I'm reading in the top left-hand corner right there that they've ascertained that the asteroid's likely not to hit the Earth. So that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, we might deserve it, but I'm glad it will likely miss us there.
Well, yeah. And the area in which it was prospected to hit Earth was like it's not going to destroy the planet. It was always going to be like city level destruction.
Yeah,
like it was going to be, you know, widespread destruction in a local area, and it was almost like around the equator, like the band of North South America and North Africa and India. Was like the potential band of places that, and so all of the racists, of course, were posting things like, well, it's not going to hit anywhere important anyway, so what it matter?
Oh my gosh,
standard stuff,
right? Unfortunately, to even say it's standard stuff, but these days it feels like it's getting there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, everybody, thanks for coming on. Thanks for joining in. I see we got some good viewership, so I appreciate y'all spending your Wednesdays with me. As always, there's an invite to join the Love First Christian Discord group. A lot of conversations to be had in that area. If you got anything going on with your personal lives, news, you are free to even join this show, even if it's your first time, you've never piped up, and you just feel like, hey, I would love to meet up with people. Aaron and I are just talking Bible and news and whatever we want to. So it's not really a formal thing, and we'd love to have you if you want to join. Aaron, anything you want to say before we toodaloo?
No, I gotta go get the kid out of bed.
Thank your family for spending allowing me to borrow 2 hours of your time every Wednesday. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Everybody else, thanks so much for joining us, and we will talk to you all later.